Thomas McKenna wiped the sweat from his face with a dirty cloth. The sun was hot and angry in the sky above his small ranch. He looked at his cattle standing in the dried grass. There were only 12 cows left. Last year he had 30. The land around his cabin was brown and cracked. No rain had fallen for 3 months. The creek that used to run behind his house was now just rocks and mud. His well was getting lower every day. Soon there might be no water at all. Thomas walked to his small wooden cabin. The roof had holes in it. When it did rain, water dripped into buckets he put on the floor. The windows had cracks. One door hung, crooked on broken hinges. He had no money to fix anything. Inside the cabin, Thomas sat at his old wooden table. On it was a letter from the bank. He had read it many times. The words were always the same. Pay your debt or lose your ranch. He owed $300. It might as well have been $3,000. He had no way to get that much money. Thomas thought about his wife, Mary. She had died from fever last winter. The doctor had wanted $50 to help her. Thomas did not have $50. He watched his wife get sicker every day until she died. Now he was alone on this failing ranch with no money and no hope. He opened his small wooden box where he kept his money. Inside were 4 silver coins and some copper pennies. Not enough to buy food for a week. Not enough to buy hay for his cattle. Not enough for anything. The nearest town was 40 miles away. The nearest neighbor was 20 miles away. Thomas had not seen another person in 2 weeks. Sometimes he talked to his horse just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. Thomas walked outside again. His cattle were hungry. The grass around his ranch was all eaten or dead. He would have to take them further away to find food. Every day, he had to go further. Every day it got harder. His horse, Buck, was old but strong. The horse had been with Thomas for 8 years. Buck was brown with white spots on his face. Sometimes Thomas thought Buck was his only real friend now. Thomas put a rope around Buck's neck and climbed on his back. He had no saddle. He had sold his good saddle last month to buy food. Now he rode with just a blanket and rope. He made clicking sounds with his tongue. Buck began to walk toward the cattle. The cows saw them coming and started to move. They knew it was time to look for grass and water. Thomas rode behind his small herd. The sun was getting hotter. Dust rose from the ground with every step. His throat was dry, but he had only a little water in his bottle. He had to save it. They walked for 2 hours. Finally, they came to a place where some green grass still grew. It was near a small stream that had not dried up completely. The cattle ran to the water and began to drink. Thomas let Buck drink too. Thomas got down from his horse and knelt by the stream. The water was low and muddy, but it was water. He filled his bottle and drank some. It tasted like dirt, but it was wet. While his cattle ate grass, Thomas sat on a rock. He thought about his life. 2 years ago, things were good. He had a wife who loved him. He had 40 cattle and money in the bank. He had plans to build a bigger house and maybe have children. Now Mary was buried under a wooden cross behind their cabin. His cattle were sick and dying. His ranch was falling apart. The bank wanted to take everything away. Thomas had been born on a farm in Ohio. His father taught him how to work with cattle and grow crops. When Thomas was 25, he came west to Montana Territory to start his own ranch. He met Mary in town. She was the daughter of a store owner. They fell in love and got married. For 5 years, life was good. They worked hard together. Mary helped with the cattle. She grew vegetables in a garden behind the house. She made their clothes and cooked good food. They were happy and thought they would always be happy. But then the bad years came. First, wolves killed 6 of his cattle. Then disease killed 8 more. Then the drought started. No rain meant no grass. No grass meant the cattle got thin and weak. Thin cattle brought little money at market. Thomas tried everything. He dug new wells but found no water. He bought hay from other ranchers, but it cost too much. He sold his extra horses, his good tools, even Mary's jewelry. Nothing was enough. When Mary got sick, Thomas spent their last money trying to save her. But the fever was too strong. She died on a cold night in December. Thomas buried her himself because he had no money to pay for a funeral. Now it was summer again. The drought was worse than ever. Thomas had not been to town in a month. He had no money to buy anything anyway. He ate beans and old bread. Sometimes he caught a fish from the stream. Sometimes he shot a rabbit with his old rifle. Thomas looked at his cattle drinking the muddy water. He counted them again. 12. Just 12 left. If he lost any more, he would have nothing to sell. If he had nothing to sell, he could not pay the bank. If he could not pay the bank, they would take his land. The sun was starting to go down. Thomas whistled to his cattle. It was time to go back to the ranch. The cattle lifted their heads from the grass. They were still hungry, but there was no more grass here. Thomas climbed back on Buck. The horse was tired but ready to work. They started the long walk home. Thomas looked at the sky. There were some clouds, but they were thin and white. No rain. Clouds. No hope of rain. As they walked, Thomas made plans. Tomorrow he would have to take the cattle even further to find grass. Maybe he would have to walk all day. Maybe he would have to sleep outside with no shelter. The bank letter said he had 30 days to pay his debt. That was 3 weeks ago. Now he had only 9 days left. 9 days to find $300. 9 days to save his ranch and his life. Thomas did not know it yet, but tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow he would make a choice that would bring 100 warriors to his door. Tomorrow would begin the most important days of his life. But tonight Thomas McKenna was just a poor rancher walking his dying cattle home to a broken cabin, under a sky that would not rain. Thomas woke up to the sound of thunder. He opened his eyes and saw dark clouds through the hole in his roof. For the first time in months, it looked like rain was coming. He jumped out of his bed and ran outside. The wind was blowing hard. The clouds were black and heavy. Lightning flashed across the sky. Thomas felt hope for the first time in weeks. Rain would save his grass. Rain would fill his wells. Rain might save his ranch. But then the rain started. It did not come slowly like a gentle spring shower. It came all at once like a wall of water falling from the sky. The drops were big and heavy. They hit the ground so hard they bounced back up. Thomas ran back into his cabin. Water was already coming through the holes in his roof. He put out his buckets and pots to catch the water. Thunder crashed so loud it shook the walls. Lightning lit up the dark morning like daylight. The rain got harder. Thomas had never seen rain like this. It was not gentle rain that would help his grass grow. This was angry rain that would wash everything away. Thomas looked out his window. Water was running everywhere. It ran off his roof in streams. It ran down the hills in rivers. The dry ground could not drink the water fast enough. Soon there were puddles everywhere. Thomas thought about his cattle. They were in the small field behind his cabin. The field had a fence around it, but the fence was old and weak. If the cattle got scared by the thunder, they might break through the fence and run away. He put on his coat and hat and ran outside. The rain hit him like bullets. In seconds, he was soaked through his clothes. He could barely see through the rain and wind. Thomas ran to the field where his cattle should be, but they were not there. The fence was broken in 3 places. His 12 cattle were gone. Thomas felt panic in his chest. Without his cattle, he had nothing. He had to find them before they got too far away. He whistled for Buck. The old horse came running through the rain. Buck's brown coat was dark and wet. Thomas climbed on Buck's back. They rode into the storm, looking for the lost cattle. The rain was so heavy Thomas could only see a few feet in front of him. He called out for his cattle, but the thunder was too loud. They searched for an hour. Finally, Thomas saw tracks in the mud. The cattle had gone toward Clearwater Creek. Thomas felt more panic. The creek was usually just a small stream, but with all this rain it would be dangerous. Thomas and Buck followed the tracks. The rain kept falling harder. The ground was now soft mud that stuck to Buck's feet. Water ran everywhere in fast streams. They came to the top of a hill. Below them was Clearwater Creek, but it was not a creek anymore. It was a wild river. The water was brown and angry. It carried tree branches and rocks. It was 10 times bigger than Thomas had ever seen it. Thomas looked for his cattle. He saw them on the other side of the raging water. They were safe, but scared. They stood together under some trees, afraid to move. Thomas had to get across the water to bring his cattle home. But the river was too dangerous. Buck was a good horse, but he could not swim across that wild water. Thomas rode along the bank looking for a safe place to cross. The water was fast and deep everywhere. He was about to give up when he heard something over the sound of the rain and thunder. It was crying. Someone was crying for help. Thomas looked across the angry river. At first he saw nothing but brown water and foam. Then he saw them, 2 small figures in the middle of the river. They were holding on to a big log that was stuck between some rocks. Thomas wiped the rain from his eyes and looked closer. They were children. 2 Native American children, a boy and a girl. They were very small and very scared. The log they were holding was not stuck tight. The water was pushing it hard. Soon the log would break free and be carried down the river. The children would drown. Thomas did not think about who the children were or where they came from. He only knew they needed help, and they needed it now. The boy looked about 8 years old. The girl was smaller, maybe 6. Their long black hair was wet and stuck to their faces. They were crying, but Thomas could barely hear them over the sound of the rushing water. The log moved. The water was winning. In a few minutes, the log would be swept away and the children would die. Thomas looked at the dangerous river. He looked at Buck. He looked at the children again. He knew what he had to do. Thomas had a rope tied to his belt. All ranchers carried rope. He took the rope and tied one end around Buck's neck. He tied the other end around his own waist. He whispered to Buck, "Stay here, old friend. Do not let me go." Thomas slid down from Buck's back. The river bank was slippery mud. He almost fell twice before he reached the water. The river was cold and fast. As soon as Thomas stepped into it, the water tried to knock him down. He held tight to the rope and took another step. The water came up to his knees, then his waist, then his chest. The current was so strong he could barely stand. Rocks and sticks hit his legs as the water carried them past. Thomas looked at the children. They saw him coming. The boy was trying to be brave, but Thomas could see he was very scared. The girl was crying louder. Thomas took another step. The water was now up to his shoulders. He could feel the river trying to sweep him away. Only the rope around his waist kept him safe. The log moved again. This time it turned halfway around. The children screamed. The girl lost her hold and almost fell into the water. The boy grabbed her hand and pulled her back to the log. Thomas knew he was running out of time. He had to reach them now, or they would all die. He took a deep breath and pushed forward into the deepest part of the river. The water went over his head. For a moment he could not breathe. The current spun him around like a leaf. Then his feet touched the bottom again. He came up gasping for air. He was only 10 feet from the children now. Thomas reached out his hand. "Grab my hand," he shouted over the noise of the water. The boy understood. He reached out, but he was still too far away. The log shook again. This time, Thomas heard the crack of wood breaking. The log was coming apart. Thomas knew he had only one chance. He let go of the rope and dove toward the children. Thomas dove through the angry water toward the children. The current grabbed him like giant hands and spun him around. Water filled his mouth and nose. He could not see anything. His hand hit something hard. It was the log. Thomas grabbed it and pulled himself up. His head came out of the water and he could breathe again. The boy was right there, holding the little girl with one arm and the log with the other. His eyes were wide with fear, but he was trying to be brave. "I help you," Thomas shouted over the noise of the water. "Trust me," the boy nodded. He understood some English. Thomas looked back toward the shore. Buck was still there, pulling on the rope, but Thomas had let go of the rope when he dove for the children. Now the rope was floating in the water behind him. The log cracked again. A big piece broke off and was swept away by the river. The part they were holding was getting smaller. Thomas knew they had seconds, not minutes. He grabbed the little girl first. She was so small and light. Her clothes were soaked and heavy with water. "Hold me tight," Thomas told her. She wrapped her small arms around his neck. Then Thomas reached for the boy. "Come on," he said. "We go together." The boy was scared to let go of the log. It was the only thing keeping him safe. But he looked at Thomas and saw kindness in his eyes. He let go of the log and grabbed Thomas's arm. At that moment, the log broke completely apart. The pieces were swept away down the river like toys. Now Thomas was in the middle of the wild river holding two children. The water was trying to push them all downstream. Thomas's legs could barely touch the bottom. He kicked hard to keep their heads above water. Thomas looked for the rope. It was floating about 20 feet away. Buck was still pulling on it, trying to help. Thomas knew he had to reach that rope or they would all drown. With the little girl on his back and the boy holding his arm, Thomas started swimming toward the rope. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. The children were heavy and scared. The water kept trying to separate them. Every few seconds, Thomas went underwater. Each time he was sure he would not come back up. But each time he kicked harder and found air again. The rope seemed to get further away instead of closer. The current was carrying them all downstream. Buck was running along the shore trying to keep up. Thomas's arms were getting tired. His legs felt like rocks. The cold water was making him weak. The little girl was crying into his ear. The boy was holding him so tight it was hard to breathe. Just when Thomas thought he could not swim anymore, his hand touched the rope. He grabbed it with all his strength. "Buck!" Thomas yelled. "Pull us in, boy." Buck understood. The smart horse backed away from the water, pulling the rope tight. Slowly, Thomas and the children were pulled toward the shore, but the water did not want to let them go. It pulled back harder. Thomas felt like he was being torn in half. The rope cut into his hands. His shoulders felt like they were being ripped apart. The little girl slipped from his back. Thomas grabbed her hand just before she went underwater. Now he was holding the rope with one hand and the girl with the other. The boy was still holding Thomas's arm, but he was slipping too. "Hold on," Thomas gasped. "Almost there." Buck pulled harder. Thomas could see the shore getting closer, but he could also feel his strength leaving him. His hand was slipping on the rope. Then Thomas felt something solid under his feet. It was the bottom of the river near the shore. He stood up in the shallow water and lifted both children above his head. "We made it," he whispered. Thomas carried the children to dry ground. All three of them fell down in the mud, gasping for air. The rain was still falling hard, but they were safe. Thomas looked at the children. The little girl was not moving. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were closed. Thomas felt panic again. He turned the girl over and pushed on her back. Water came out of her mouth. He pushed again. More water came out. Then the little girl coughed and opened her eyes. The boy was sitting up, but he was shaking all over. His skin was also blue from the cold water. Both children were close to dying from cold. Thomas knew he had to get them warm fast or they would still die. He picked up the little girl and helped the boy stand up. "We go to my house," Thomas said. "I make you warm." Thomas whistled for Buck. The faithful horse came running. Thomas put the little girl on Buck's back and helped the boy climb up behind her. Then Thomas took Buck's rope and started walking toward his cabin. The storm was getting worse. The wind was so strong it almost knocked them down. The rain was so heavy Thomas could barely see his own cabin when they reached it. Thomas carried both children inside. They were unconscious again. Their breathing was slow and weak. Thomas had seen this before when cattle fell through ice in winter. The children were dying from cold. Thomas started a fire in his fireplace as fast as he could. He used all his dry wood and some old newspapers. Soon the fire was burning bright and hot. Thomas took off the children's wet clothes. They were so cold their skin was white and blue. He wrapped them in his own blankets and put them close to the fire. Then Thomas went to his kitchen. He had very little food, but he heated some water and made weak soup with beans and a little meat. The children needed something warm inside them. For the next hour, Thomas worked to save the children. He rubbed their hands and feet to warm them. He put hot soup in their mouths, one spoon at a time. He kept the fire burning bright. Slowly, the children's skin began to turn pink again. Their breathing got stronger. The little girl opened her eyes first. She looked around and seemed scared. "You safe now?" Thomas said softly. "I am, friend." The girl did not understand his words, but she understood his kind voice. She stopped being scared. Soon the boy woke up too. He looked at Thomas for a long time. Then he said something in his own language. "I not understand," Thomas said. "But you safe. You both safe." The boy tried to speak English. "Thank you," he said quietly. Thomas smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in months. Outside, the storm was still raging. The rain pounded on the roof and the wind shook the walls. But inside the small cabin, 3 people were warm and safe by the fire. Thomas did not know who these children were or where they came from. He did not know that their father was a great chief. He did not know that saving them would change his life forever. All Thomas knew was that 2 children had needed help and he had helped them. It was what any good person would do, but not everyone would have jumped into that wild river. Not everyone would have risked their life for children they did not know. Thomas McKenna was poor in money, but rich in courage and kindness. As the night went on, Thomas stayed awake watching the children sleep. He made sure the fire did not go out. He made sure they stayed warm. He gave them water when they woke up thirsty. The storm began to calm down near morning. The rain got softer. The wind got quieter. The worst was over. Thomas finally fell asleep in his chair by the fire. He had one hand on his rifle and one eye open. He would protect these children until he could get them back to their family. He did not know that their family was already looking for them. He did not know that 100 warriors were riding through the night. He did not know that by dawn, his small ranch would be surrounded by the most feared war party in all of Montana. Territory. Thomas woke up when the morning sun came through his window. The storm was over. The sky was clear and blue. Everything outside was wet and clean. Thomas looked at the children sleeping by the fireplace. They were breathing well now. Their skin was pink and warm. They would live. The little girl opened her eyes first. She sat up and looked around the cabin. When she saw Thomas, she smiled a little. She was not afraid anymore. Thomas smiled back. "Good morning," he said softly. The girl said something in her own language. Thomas did not understand the words, but he knew she was saying, "Thank you." The boy woke up next. He was older and more careful. He looked at Thomas for a long time before he spoke. "You save us," the boy said in slow English. "Yes," Thomas said. "You were in the river. I pulled you out." The boy nodded. "I remember. You very brave." Thomas felt good to hear those words. He had not felt good about anything for a long time. "What are your names?" Thomas asked. The boy pointed to himself. "I am Running Bear." Then he pointed to the little girl. "She is Little Sparrow. She is my sister." "Running Bear and Little Sparrow," Thomas repeated. "Good names. I am Thomas." "Thomas," Running Bear said, trying to say it right. Thomas laughed. "Yes, Thomas, but you can call me Tom." Little Sparrow tried to say it too. "Tom," she said, and giggled. Thomas felt his heart warm up. He had not heard children laugh in his cabin for a long time. It was a good sound. "Are you hungry?" Thomas asked. Running Bear nodded, very hungry. Thomas went to his kitchen. He did not have much food, but he would share what he had. He made porridge with oats and a little sugar. He opened his last can of peaches. He made coffee for himself and milk with water for the children. When Thomas brought the food to the children, their eyes got big. They had not eaten for a day and a night. "Eat slow," Thomas said. "Your stomachs need time." Running Bear and Little Sparrow ate every bite. Thomas gave them most of the food and kept only a little for himself. He was used to being hungry. After breakfast, Thomas helped the children put on their clothes. The clothes were dry now from Hanging by the fire all night. Where do you live? Thomas asked Running Bear. Running Bear pointed toward the mountains. Far, he said. Many miles. Where is your family? With the tribe. They moved to winter camp. Thomas understood. The Native American tribes moved around to follow the buffalo and find good places to camp. Running Bear's family would be worried. About the children. We need to get you home, Thomas said. Running Bear looked sad. We were picking berries by the creek. The big rain came fast. We could not run away. Thomas nodded. Flash floods were dangerous. The children were lucky to be alive. Your family will be looking for you, Thomas said. Yes, Running Bear said. My father will be very worried. Thomas did not ask who the boy's father was. It did not matter. All fathers worried about their children. For the rest of that day, Thomas took care of Running Bear and Little Sparrow. He showed them around his ranch. Little Sparrow liked his chickens. Running Bear was interested in his cattle. You have few cows, Running Bear said. Yes, Thomas said. Times are hard. Running Bear looked at the broken fence and the old cabin. You are poor like many of our people. Thomas was surprised that a child would understand about being poor. But Running Bear was right. Thomas was poor. That evening, Thomas made more soup. He gave the children the best pieces of meat and vegetables. He ate mostly broth. Little Sparrow watched Thomas eat. She saw that he was giving them the good food and keeping little for himself. She took a piece of meat from her bowl and put it in Thomas's bowl. Thomas looked at her. No, Little Sparrow, you eat it. You need to grow strong. But Little Sparrow pushed the meat toward Thomas. She wanted to share just like he was sharing. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. This little girl had almost died in the river. Now she was trying to take care of him. Thank you, Thomas said. He ate the meat. That night, Thomas gave the children his bed. He slept on the floor by the fire. Every few hours he woke up to check on them. They slept peacefully. The second day was much the same. Thomas shared his food with the children. He told them stories about his ranch and his life. Running Bear told Thomas about his tribe and their way of life. My people follow the buffalo, Running Bear explained. We move when they move. We take only what we need from the land. Thomas thought this was wise. White men often took too much from the land and left nothing for later. Little Sparrow did not speak much English, but she was learning fast. She repeated words that Thomas and Running Bear said. She especially liked to say Tom and thank you. On the second evening, Thomas was sitting by the fire carving a piece of wood with his knife. Little Sparrow came and sat beside him. She watched him work. Thomas was making a small wooden horse. He used his knife to cut away tiny pieces of wood. Slowly, the shape of a horse appeared. Little Sparrow watched with big eyes. She had never seen anyone make something like this. When Thomas finished the horse, he gave it to Little Sparrow. For you, he said. Little Sparrow held the wooden horse carefully. It was small enough to fit in her hand. Thomas had carved it to look like Buck, his faithful horse. Little Sparrow hugged the wooden horse to her chest. Then she hugged Thomas. She said something in her language that sounded like a prayer. Running Bear translated. She says you are like a grandfather to her. She says you have a good heart. Thomas felt his throat get tight. He had always wanted children of his own. Mary had wanted children too. But it never happened. Now for just a few days he had these two beautiful children to care for. On the third day, Thomas knew the children were strong enough to travel. He also knew their family would be very worried by now. Tomorrow we look for your family, Thomas told Running Bear. How will we find them? Running Bear asked. Thomas thought about this. The tribe could be anywhere in the mountains. It would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. We will go to the creek where I found you, Thomas said. Maybe they will come back there to look for you. Running Bear nodded. That is good thinking. That evening, Thomas used the last of his coffee to make a special dinner for the children. He opened his last can of beans. He even used some of his precious sugar to make sweet tea. As they ate, Thomas felt sad. He would miss these children when they went back to their family. For 3 days, his cabin had felt like a home again. When the children left, it would just be a lonely place once more. Little Sparrow must have seen the sadness in Thomas's face. She came over and patted his hand. She said something in her language. She says you will always be her friend. Running Bear, translated. She says she will never forget you. I will never forget you either, Thomas said. That night, Thomas packed some food for their journey. He filled his water bottle. He got his rifle ready in case they met dangerous animals. He looked at the children sleeping peacefully in his bed. Tomorrow he would take them back to their family. It was the right thing to do, but it would also be one of the hardest things he had ever done. Thomas did not sleep much that night. He sat by the fire thinking about the past 3 days. These children had brought joy back into his life. They had reminded him that there was still good in the world. When morning came, Thomas would start the journey to return Running Bear and Little Sparrow to their people. He did not know that their people were already very close. He did not know that their father was the most powerful chief in all the territory. He did not know that in just a few hours, his quiet ranch would be surrounded by 100 mounted warriors and his life would change forever. Thomas woke up before the sun rose on the 4th day. Something was different. The air felt strange. Buck was making nervous sounds outside. Thomas got up quietly so he would not wake the children. He walked to the window and looked out. Everything looked normal. The sky was getting light. The ground was still wet from the big storm 3 days ago. But Buck kept making noise. The horse was walking back and forth by the fence. His ears were pointed up like he heard something far away. Thomas trusted Buck. The old horse had good senses. If Buck was nervous, there was a reason. Thomas put on his boots and coat. He picked up his rifle and walked outside. The morning air was cool and fresh. He could hear birds singing in the trees. Thomas walked over to Buck. "What is it, boy? What do you hear?" Buck looked toward the hills to the north. His nostrils were wide, smelling the air. Thomas looked the same way but saw nothing. Then Thomas heard it too. It was very soft at first, like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. There was no storm coming. The sound got a little louder. It was not thunder. It was something else. Something that made Thomas's heart beat faster. It was the sound of many horses running. Thomas had heard this sound before, during the Indian Wars when cavalry soldiers rode fast across the plains. But there were no soldiers in this area. The nearest army fort was 200 miles away. The sound got louder and closer. Thomas could feel the ground shake under his feet. Whatever was coming, it was big. Thomas ran back to his cabin. He shook Running Bear gently. "Wake up," Thomas whispered. "Someone is coming." Running Bear opened his eyes. He listened to the sound of horses. His face changed. He looked scared and excited at the same time. "Many horses," Running Bear said. "Maybe my people." Thomas felt relief and fear at the same time. Relief because the children would be safe with their family. Fear because he did not know how the Native Americans would feel about a white man having their children. "Wake your sister," Thomas said. "Quickly." Running Bear shook Little Sparrow gently. She opened her eyes and smiled. But when she heard the sound of horses, her smile went away. Thomas looked out the window again. Now he could see dust rising from the hills. A lot of dust, more than a few horses would make. "How many people are in your tribe?" Thomas asked Running Bear. "Many," Running Bear said. "My father is important chief. Many warriors follow him." Thomas felt his stomach drop. An important chief. That meant this was not just a family looking for lost children. This was a war party. The sound of horses got much louder. Thomas could now hear individual hoofbeats. He could hear the jingle of metal. He could hear voices calling out in a language he did not understand. "Stay inside," Thomas told the children. Let me talk to them first. Thomas checked his rifle. It was loaded, but what good would one rifle do against many warriors? If they wanted to kill him, he could not stop them. Thomas walked outside and stood in front of his cabin. Buck ran over and stood next to him. The faithful horse would stay with Thomas no matter what happened. The first warrior appeared on the hill. He was riding a black horse and carrying a long spear with feathers tied to it. Behind him came another warrior, then another. Soon, the whole hill was covered with mounted warriors. Thomas had never seen so many Native American fighters in one place. They were magnificent and terrifying at the same time. The warriors rode down the hill toward Thomas's ranch. They did not ride fast like they were attacking. They rode slow and careful, like they were being respectful. Thomas counted as they came, closer. 20 warriors, 30, 50. The number kept growing. Soon there were more warriors than Thomas could count surrounding his small ranch. All the warriors were painted for war. Their faces had red and black designs. Their horses had symbols painted on them too. Many warriors carried spears and bows. Some had rifles. But they did not point their weapons at Thomas. They sat on their horses in a big circle around his cabin and waited. Then Thomas saw him. One warrior was different from all the others. He rode a white horse and wore a huge headdress, made of eagle feathers. The feathers came down his back almost to the ground. This warrior was older than the others. His face was lined with years of wisdom and war. His eyes were dark and serious. Everything about him said, "Chief." The chief rode slowly toward Thomas. The other warriors stayed back, but Thomas could feel them watching every move he made. When the chief was 20 feet away, he stopped his horse. He looked at Thomas for a long time without speaking. Thomas looked back. He was scared, but he would not show it. Finally, the chief spoke. His voice was deep and strong. "White man," he said in English, "you have something that belongs to me." Thomas's mouth was dry, but he found his voice. "Yes," he said. "I have your children. They are safe." At that moment, Running Bear came out of the cabin. When he saw the chief, he shouted with joy, "Father!" Running Bear ran toward the chief. The chief's serious face changed. It became soft and full of love. He jumped down from his horse and caught Running Bear in his arms. Then Little Sparrow came out of the cabin. She was holding the wooden horse Thomas had made for her. When she saw the chief, she started crying and running. "Father, father," she cried in her own language. The chief knelt down and hugged both children at the same time. Thomas could see tears in the chief's eyes. This great warrior was crying because his children were safe. The other warriors made sounds of joy. They had been looking for these children for 4 days. They had thought the children were dead. The chief stood up and looked at Thomas again. But now his look was different. It was not suspicious or angry. It was curious. "My children," the chief said. "Where did you find them?" "In the river," Thomas said. "During the big storm, they were holding onto a log." The chief's eyes got wide. "Clearwater Creek during the flood?" "Yes," Thomas said. "I pulled them out." The chief looked at the still swollen creek. He looked at Thomas. He was a small man, not a warrior. How had this small white man saved 2 children from a flood that would kill most men? Running Bear spoke to his father in their language. He talked fast and pointed at Thomas many times. Little Sparrow held up the wooden horse and said, "Tom," over and over. When Running Bear finished talking, the chief looked at Thomas with new eyes. Now there was respect in his look. "My son tells me you risked your life to save them," the chief said. "Yes," Thomas said simply. "He tells me you shared your food when you had little." "Yes." "He tells me you gave them your bed and slept on the floor." "Yes." The chief was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Why?" Thomas did not understand. "Why what? Why did you save children who are not your people? Why did you care for them like they were your own?" Thomas thought about this. He could have said many things. He could have talked about being a good Christian or doing what was right. But he told the simple truth. "Because they needed help," Thomas said. and I could help them. The chief nodded slowly. This was an answer he understood. In his culture, helping others was the most important thing a person could do. The chief walked closer to Thomas. He was tall and strong. His presence was powerful. All around them, 100 warriors watched and waited to see what their chief would do. "I am White Eagle," the chief said. "Chief of the Lakota. These are my children. This is my war party." Thomas felt his knees go weak. White Eagle was famous throughout the territory. He was known as a fierce warrior and a wise leader. Some white men feared him more than any other chief. "I am Thomas McKenna," Thomas said. "This is my ranch." White Eagle looked around at the broken fence, the old cabin, the few cattle. "You are poor," he said. "Yes," Thomas admitted. "But you shared what little you had with my children." "Yes." White Eagle reached up and touched his great headdress. Slowly he pulled out one eagle feather. It was large and beautiful with black and white stripes. "In my people's way," White Eagle said, "this feather is given only to the bravest warriors, men who risk their lives to save others." White Eagle held out the feather to Thomas. Thomas did not know if he should take it. This was a great honor, but he was not Native American. "Take it," White Eagle said. "You have earned it." Thomas took the feather with shaking hands. It was soft and light, but it felt heavier than gold. "Thank you," Thomas said. White Eagle nodded. Then he turned to his warriors and spoke in Lakota. His voice carried across the ranch. Thomas did not understand the words, but he could hear the strength in them. When White Eagle finished speaking, all the warriors raised their weapons in the air and shouted. It was not a war cry. It was a cry of honor. White Eagle turned back to Thomas. "I have told my warriors that you are now brother to the Lakota people. You will always be welcome in our camps. You will always be under our protection." Thomas could hardly believe what he was hearing. A few minutes ago he thought he might die. Now he was being adopted by the most powerful tribe in the territory. But White Eagle was not finished. He looked around at Thomas's poor ranch again. He saw the broken fences and the few thin cattle. "You have done a great thing for my family," White Eagle said. "Now my family will do something for you." White Eagle walked around Thomas's ranch with slow, careful steps. His dark eyes looked at everything: the broken fence posts, the holes in the cabin roof, the small field where Thomas's few cattle stood. The great chief was thinking. Thomas could see it in his face. White Eagle was a man who made important decisions for his people. Now he was making a decision about Thomas. Running Bear and Little Sparrow stayed close to their father, but they kept looking at Thomas with smiles. They wanted their father to help the man who had saved them. The other warriors sat on their horses in the big circle around the ranch. They were quiet and still. They waited for their chief to speak. Whatever White Eagle decided, they would follow. Thomas's heart was beating fast. He did not know what to expect. White Eagle seemed friendly now, but Thomas had heard stories about how quickly Native American chiefs could change their minds. White Eagle stopped walking and looked at Thomas's cattle. "How many cows do you have, Anta?" he asked. 12, Thomas said. He felt ashamed. A real rancher should have many more cattle. "Last year?" White Eagle asked. 30, Thomas admitted. White Eagle nodded. He understood about hard times. His people had faced many hard times too. "The drought," White Eagle said. It was not a question. He knew about the long months without rain. "Yes," Thomas said. "No grass, no water. The cattle got thin and died." White Eagle walked to Thomas's well. He looked down into it. The water was very low. "This well will be dry soon," White Eagle said. Thomas nodded. "Maybe 2 weeks." White Eagle looked toward the swollen creek. The big storm brought much water, but it ran away fast. The ground could not drink it. "Yes," Thomas said. "Too much water too fast, then none at all." White Eagle understood. This was the way of the land. Sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. A wise man learned to live with both. White Eagle walked to Thomas's cabin. He looked at the broken door and the holes in the roof. "You live alone?" White Eagle asked. "Yes," Thomas said. "My wife died last winter." White Eagle's face became sad. "The fever?" "Yes." White Eagle nodded. Many people had died from fever that winter, both white and Native American. Sickness did not care about the color of a person's skin. "Children?" White Eagle asked. "No," Thomas said quietly. "We wanted children, but—" Thomas did not finish. White Eagle understood. Some people were blessed with children, others were not. It was the way of life. White Eagle looked at Running Bear and Little Sparrow. They were standing near Thomas now. Little Sparrow was still, holding the wooden horse he had made for her. "My children like you," White Eagle said. "I like them too," Thomas said. "They are good children. You should be proud." White Eagle smiled for the first time. "Yes, I am proud, but they were almost lost forever." White Eagle walked back to Thomas. He stood very close. Thomas could see the wisdom lines around the chief's eyes. "Tell me about the river," White Eagle said. "Tell me exactly what happened." Thomas told the story. He told about hearing the children crying over the sound of the storm. He told about tying the rope around his waist. He told about diving into the wild water to reach them. White Eagle listened to every word. Sometimes he asked questions. "The water was over your head? You could not see? The log was breaking apart?" When Thomas finished, White Eagle was quiet for a long time. He looked at the creek, still running high from the storm. He imagined how it must have been during the flood. "Many men would not have tried," White Eagle said finally. "I had to try," Thomas said. "They were just children." "Many men would have tried and failed," White Eagle continued. "The water would have killed them too." Thomas did not know what to say to that. "But you succeeded," White Eagle said. "You brought them out alive. How?" Thomas thought about this. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I was scared the whole time. I thought we would all die." White Eagle nodded. This was the mark of true courage. Not being without fear, but acting in spite of fear. White Eagle turned to his warriors. He spoke to them in Lakota. Thomas heard the names Running Bear and Little Sparrow several times. He heard his own name too, Thomas. Some of the warriors made sounds of approval. Others nodded their heads. They were hearing the story of the rescue for the first time. One old warrior with gray hair rode his horse closer. He spoke to White Eagle in their language. His voice sounded serious. White Eagle answered the old warrior. They talked back and forth for several minutes. Thomas could not understand the words, but he could tell they were discussing something important. Running Bear moved closer to Thomas. "Gray Wolf is my grandfather," he whispered. "He asks why a white man would risk his life for Native American children." Thomas felt worried. Maybe not all of White Eagle's warriors were happy about what he had done. White Eagle and Gray Wolf finished talking. Gray Wolf looked at Thomas for a long moment. Then he nodded his head once and rode his horse back to the circle. "My father-in-law had questions," White Eagle explained to Thomas. "He has seen many years of war between our peoples. He finds it hard to believe that a white man would help us." "What did you tell him?" Thomas asked. "I told him what my children told me, that you shared your food when you had little, that you gave them your bed and slept on the floor, that you treated them like they were your own children." White Eagle paused. "I told him that good hearts come in all colors." Thomas felt relief. But he could see that White Eagle was still thinking about something. "There is another problem," White Eagle said. Thomas's heart sank. "What problem?" "You saved my children. Now I must repay this debt. It is our way." Thomas did not understand. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do." White Eagle shook his head. "No, not anyone would do this. And in my culture, when someone saves your family, you must repay them. It is a matter of honor." "I don't want anything," Thomas said. Seeing your children safe is enough. White Eagle smiled. This is why you deserve our help. You ask for nothing, so we will give you everything we can. White Eagle looked around the ranch again. He saw the problems clearly. No water, poor grass, few cattle, broken buildings, debts to the bank. How much money do you owe the white man's bank? White Eagle asked. Thomas was surprised by the question. $300, but I don't expect you to. White Eagle held up his hand to stop Thomas from talking. We do not use the white man's money, but we have other things of value. White Eagle walked to one of his warriors. The warrior was leading several extra horses. These horses were beautiful and strong, much better than buck. Horses, White Eagle said. Good horses are worth much money to white men. Thomas looked at the horses. They were indeed beautiful. A horse like that might sell for $50 or more. I cannot take your horses, Thomas said. You are not taking them, White Eagle said. I am giving them to you. There is a difference. White Eagle spoke to the warrior in Lakota. The warrior nodded and brought 3 horses forward. One was a black stallion with white markings. One was a brown mare with a white face. One was a gray gelding with black mane and tail. These horses will pay your debt to the bank, White Eagle said. Thomas stared at the beautiful animals. They were worth much more than $300. This is too much, Thomas said. It is not enough, White Eagle replied. You saved 2 lives. 3 horses is a small price for 2 lives. Little Sparrow tugged on her father's shirt. She said something in Lakota and held up the wooden horse Thomas had made. White Eagle looked at the small carved horse. My daughter says you made this for her. Yes, Thomas said. It's just a little toy. It is more than a toy, White Eagle said. You made something beautiful for a child who was not yours. This shows your heart. White Eagle took the wooden horse and looked at it carefully. Thomas had carved it to look like buck, with white spots on the face and a gentle expression. You have skill with wood, White Eagle said. A little, Thomas admitted. My father taught me. White Eagle gave the wooden horse back to Little Sparrow. She hugged it tight and smiled at Thomas. You will keep the horses, White Eagle said. It was not a question. It was a decision. But there's more. White Eagle continued. Horses will pay your debt, but you need other help too. White Eagle looked at Thomas's broken fence and dried up fields. Tomorrow, my warriors will help you fix your ranch. Thomas could not believe what he was hearing. White Eagle wanted his warriors to help fix the ranch, but these were fighting men, not ranch workers. I cannot ask your warriors to do work for me, Thomas said. White Eagle looked surprised. You do not ask. I command. They will be honored to help the man who saved my children. White Eagle turned to his warriors and spoke in Lakota. His voice was strong and clear. When he finished, all the warriors raised their weapons and shouted again. They agree, White Eagle said with a smile. Tomorrow we begin. That night, the Lakota warriors made camp around Thomas's ranch. They built fires and set up temporary shelters. Thomas had never seen so many people on his land. White Eagle and his children stayed in Thomas's cabin. Little Sparrow fell asleep in Thomas's bed, still holding her wooden horse. Running Bear slept on the floor near the fireplace. Thomas tried to give his bed to White Eagle, but the chief refused. You are the host, White Eagle said. The bed is yours. So Thomas slept in his own bed for the first time in 3 days. But he did not sleep much. He kept thinking about everything that had happened. 4 days ago, he was a poor rancher about to lose everything. Now he had 3 valuable horses and 100 warriors ready to help him. When the sun came up, the Lakota camp was already busy. Warriors were eating breakfast and getting ready to work. Thomas had never seen anything like it. White Eagle divided his men into groups. Some would work on the fence, some would dig a new well, some would repair the cabin, some would gather the scattered cattle. But I don't have tools for so many men, Thomas said. White Eagle smiled. We brought our own tools. The warriors had axes and shovels. They had ropes and hammers. They had everything needed to fix a ranch. Thomas tried to help with the work, but the warriors would not let him. Every time he picked up a tool, someone would take it from him politely and point for him to sit down. "They want to do this for you," White Eagle explained. "It is their way of saying thank you." So Thomas sat on a log and watched 100 warriors fix his ranch. It was like watching magic. The group working on the fence moved like a machine. Some men pulled out the old broken posts, others dug new holes, others set new posts and stretched new wire. In 2 hours, they had fixed fence that would have taken Thomas 2 weeks to repair. The group digging the new well was just as amazing. They had found a spot where White Eagle said water would be. Thomas did not know how the chief knew this, but he trusted him. The warriors dug in shifts. When one man got tired, another took his place. They sang work songs as they dug. The hole got deeper and deeper. By noon, the well diggers hit water. Fresh, clear water bubbled up from the ground. The warriors cheered. Thomas almost cried with joy. He had not seen that much water in months. The group working on Thomas's cabin was equally busy. They patched the holes in the roof. They fixed the broken door. They replaced cracked windows with pieces of glass they had brought with them. Thomas did not know where they had gotten glass in the middle of nowhere. When he asked, White Eagle just smiled and said, "We trade with many people." The group gathering cattle had the biggest surprise for Thomas. They came back not just with his 12 cows, but with 20 more cattle they had found wandering in the hills. "These cows have no brand," the leader of that group told White Eagle in English. "They belong to no one. Now they belong to Thomas," White Eagle said. Thomas now had 32 cattle instead of 12. His herd was bigger than it had been before the drought, but the biggest surprise came when White Eagle took Thomas to see something special. "My people know this land," White Eagle said as they walked toward the hills. "We have lived here for many generations. We know its secrets." They climbed a small hill behind Thomas's ranch. At the top, White Eagle pointed to a hidden valley below. "Look," White Eagle said. Thomas looked down and gasped. The valley was green and beautiful. A clear stream ran through the middle of it. Rich grass grew everywhere. It was like a secret paradise. "I never knew this was here," Thomas said. "White men do not explore much," White Eagle said. "They build their ranches and stay close to them. But this valley has been here always." "Whose land is this?" Thomas asked. "According to white man's law, it is government land. No one owns it. You can claim it if you file papers in town." Thomas stared at the valley. It was bigger than his entire ranch. The grass was thick and green. The water was clear and deep. "This valley never dries up," White Eagle continued. "The spring that feeds it comes from deep in the mountain. Even in the worst drought, there is water here." "Why are you showing me this?" Thomas asked. "Because you will need it," White Eagle said. "Your cattle will grow fat on this grass. You will never be poor again." They walked down into the valley. Thomas could not believe how beautiful it was. The grass was knee-high. The stream was full of fish. There were trees for shade and shelter. "How do I get my cattle here?" Thomas asked. White Eagle pointed to a path that led from Thomas's ranch to the valley. "My warriors will cut a trail tomorrow. Your cattle can walk here easily." That evening, White Eagle gathered all his warriors around a big fire. Thomas sat beside the great chief. Running Bear and Little Sparrow sat on the other side of their father. White Eagle stood up and spoke to his people in Lakota. Thomas could not understand the words, but he could hear the power in them. The warriors listened with great respect. When White Eagle finished speaking, he switched to English so Thomas could understand. "I have told my warriors about the new trail we will cut tomorrow," White Eagle said. "I have told them about the claim Thomas will file for the hidden valley." White Eagle paused and looked at Thomas. "I have also told them about our new trading agreement." "Trading agreement?" Thomas asked. White Eagle smiled. "Yes. My people need things the white world makes. Tools, blankets, rifles, sugar, coffee. I don't have those things," Thomas said. "But you can get them," White Eagle said. "You can order them from traders in town. We will pay you with horses and buffalo hides and furs." Thomas began to understand. White Eagle was offering to make him a trader between the white world and the Lakota world. But I don't know anything about trading, Thomas said. You will learn, White Eagle said. And you will be honest. That is more important than experience. White Eagle explained how the trading would work. The Lakota would bring horses and furs to Thomas's ranch. Thomas would take them to town and sell them. With the money, he would buy the things the Lakota needed. He would make a fair profit on each trade. This will make you rich, White Eagle said. Why do you trust me? Thomas asked. White Eagle looked at Running Bear and Little Sparrow. A man who risks his life for children who are not his own can be trusted with anything. One of the warriors brought White Eagle a beautiful war shirt made of soft leather and decorated with beads and feathers. This is for you, White Eagle said, handing the shirt to Thomas. Thomas took the shirt carefully. It was the most beautiful piece of clothing he had ever seen. I cannot wear this, Thomas said. I am not a warrior. You are a warrior, White Eagle said firmly. You fought the wild river and won. You saved my children's lives. You are a warrior of the heart. White Eagle stood up again and spoke to all his warriors in Lakota. Then he switched back to English. I have declared you to be adopted brother of the Lakota people, White Eagle said. You are no longer just Thomas McKenna, white rancher. You are now brother who saves children of the Lakota nation. The warriors all stood up and shouted Thomas's new name in Lakota. The sound echoed across the hills. Thomas felt tears in his eyes. A week ago he was alone and poor and ready to give up. Now he had a new family, a new name, and a new life. Little Sparrow came over and hugged Thomas. She said something in Lakota. She says you are the best uncle in the world, Running Bear translated. Uncle? Thomas asked. Yes, White Eagle said. My children have adopted you too. You are now their uncle. Thomas hugged Little Sparrow back. For the first time since Mary died, he felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, Thomas lay in his bed listening to the sounds of the Lakota camp outside. He thought about all the changes in his life. Tomorrow the warriors would finish their work and leave. But they would be back. This was just the beginning. Thomas fell asleep holding the eagle feather White Eagle had given him. In his dreams, he saw the hidden valley full of fat cattle. He saw wagon loads of trade goods. He saw a future full of hope instead of despair. He did not know that the biggest changes were still to come. The next morning was the last day White Eagle's warriors would work on Thomas's ranch. They had already done more than Thomas thought possible. The fence was strong and straight. The cabin looked better than it had in years. The new well gave fresh water every day. A clear trail now led from the ranch to the hidden valley. But the warriors had one more surprise for Thomas. Today we bring your cattle to the valley, White Eagle announced. Thomas had been worried about this. His cattle were used to staying near the ranch. How would he get them to walk to a place they had never been? He did not need to worry. The Lakota warriors were experts with cattle. They surrounded the herd on horseback and gently guided them toward the new trail. Thomas rode Buck behind the herd. He could not believe how easy the warriors made it look. The cattle walked calmly along the trail toward the hidden valley. When they reached the valley, Thomas's cattle saw the green grass and clear water. They immediately spread out and began eating. They had not seen grass this good in 2 years. They will grow fat here, White Eagle said. In 1 year, you will have many calves. Your herd will double. Thomas watched his cattle eating in the beautiful valley. He thought about the bank debt that had worried him so much. With the 3 horses White Eagle had given him, that debt would be paid. With this valley, he would never be poor again. I don't know how to thank you, Thomas told. White Eagle, you do not need to thank me, White Eagle replied. You saved my children. I could never repay that debt fully. That afternoon, White Eagle began preparing his warriors to leave. They packed their tools and rolled up their sleeping blankets. Soon they would ride back to their winter camp in the mountains. But before they left, White Eagle had one more important thing to do. He called Thomas to stand before all the warriors. Little Sparrow and Running Bear stood beside their father. "Brother who saves children," White Eagle said in his formal chief voice. "You have shown great courage. You have shown great kindness. Today I give you the protection of the Lakota Nation." White Eagle held up a special necklace made of bear claws and eagle feathers. "Anyone who wears this necklace is under Lakota protection," White Eagle explained. "No member of our tribe will ever harm you. Other tribes who see this will know you are our friend." White Eagle put the necklace around Thomas's neck. It was heavy and beautiful. "Wear this always," White Eagle said. "It will keep you safe." Then, Little Sparrow stepped forward. She had something in her hands. It was a small leather pouch decorated with colorful beads. "For you, Uncle Tom," she said in careful English. Thomas opened the pouch. Inside were flower seeds. "Little Sparrow picked these seeds herself," Running Bear explained. "She wants you to plant flowers around your cabin. She says your ranch needs a beauty, not just cattle." Thomas felt his throat get tight with emotion. This little girl thought about making his home beautiful. "Thank you, Little Sparrow," Thomas said. "I will plant them where I can see them every day." Little Sparrow smiled and hugged Thomas one more time. Then it was time for the warriors to leave. They mounted their horses and formed a long line. "What do you mean?" Eagle, Running Bear, and Little Sparrow were at the front. "We will be back," White Eagle promised. "In 2 weeks we will bring the first trade goods, horses and furs. I will be ready," Thomas said. White Eagle reached out and shook Thomas's hand in the white man's way. "You are truly our brother now," he said. The long line of warriors began to move. Thomas watched them ride up the hill and disappear over the top. In minutes his ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Before the quiet had felt lonely and sad. Now it felt peaceful and hopeful. Thomas walked around his ranch looking at all the improvements. The strong fence, the repaired cabin, the full well. Everything was better than it had been in years. That evening, Thomas rode Buck to the hidden valley to check on his cattle. They were still eating the rich grass and drinking the clear water. They looked happy and healthy. Thomas sat by the stream and thought about everything that had happened. 1 week ago, he had been ready to give up. He had thought about leaving his ranch and going back east to find work in a factory. Now he had a future. He had cattle and horses and land. He had a new family among the Lakota people. He had a business partnership that would make him wealthy, all because he had jumped into a flooding river to save 2 children. Thomas took the eagle feather from his pocket and looked at it. In the Lakota way, this feather meant he was a warrior. Not a warrior who fought with guns and arrows, but a warrior who fought for what was right. 2 weeks later, White Eagle returned with 20 warriors and pack horses loaded with buffalo hides and beautiful beadwork. Thomas had been waiting with a wagon full of tools and blankets he had bought in town. The trading went perfectly. Thomas sold the buffalo hides for twice what he paid for the tools and blankets. Both sides were happy with the deal. This was just the beginning. Every month, the Lakota brought more goods to trade. Thomas's business grew quickly. Soon he had to hire men to help him handle all the trading. Thomas used his profits to improve his ranch even more. He built a bigger cabin. He bought more cattle. He planted crops in the fields around his house, but he never forgot Little Sparrow's gift. He planted her flower seeds around his cabin. Every spring, beautiful wildflowers bloomed in bright colors. The ranch was not just successful now, it was beautiful too. Running Bear and Little Sparrow visited often with their father. Thomas watched them grow up and become strong young people. He taught Running Bear how to carve wood. Little Sparrow learned to speak English as well as any white child. Years passed. Thomas's ranch became the most successful in the territory. He paid off his debts and had money in the bank. He built the big house he and Mary had dreamed of. Sometimes travelers stopped at Thomas's ranch and were surprised to see Lakota warriors there. They were even more surprised to see a white man wearing eagle feathers and bear claws. "Are you not afraid?" they would ask Thomas. "Of what?" Thomas would reply. "Of the Indians," they would say. Thomas would smile and point to Running Bear and Little Sparrow playing in his yard. "Those are not Indians," he would say. "Those are my nephew and niece." White Eagle kept his promise. The Lakota protection kept Thomas safe from all troubles. When cattle thieves came to the territory, they stayed away from Thomas's ranch. When other tribes made war, Thomas's ranch remained peaceful. Thomas never married again. He said he already had a family. Every Lakota child called him Uncle Tom. Every warrior called him brother. When White Eagle grew old, he made Thomas a member of the tribal council. Thomas was the first white man ever given this honor. "You understand our ways," White Eagle explained. "You know that courage and kindness matter more than the color of a man's skin." Thomas lived to be an old man. His ranch grew to be one of the largest in Montana. His trading business made him wealthy beyond his dreams. But when people asked him about his success, Thomas always told the same story. He told about a stormy day when he heard children crying in a flooding river. He told about jumping into the water without thinking about the danger. "Everything good in my life came from that one moment," Thomas would say, "when I chose to help instead of walking away." Thomas kept Little Sparrow's wooden horse on his mantle until the day he died. Next to it was White Eagle's eagle feather and the bear claw necklace. When Thomas died, hundreds of people came to his funeral. White men came from town. Lakota warriors came from the reservation. Running Bear and Little Sparrow, now grown with children of their own, carried his coffin. They buried Thomas on a hill overlooking his ranch and the hidden valley. On his gravestone, they carved words in both English and Lakota: "Brother who saves children, a man who proved that courage and kindness can change the world." Every spring, wildflowers still bloom around Thomas's grave. Little Sparrow, now an old woman herself, still comes to plant new seeds every year. The story of Thomas McKenna and White Eagle became legend in Montana Territory. It was told around campfires and in schoolhouses. It was told to show that people of different backgrounds could be friends and brothers. But for those who knew Thomas personally, the most important part of the story was simple. A poor rancher saw children in danger and risked everything to save them. In return, he gained a family, a fortune, and a place in history. Thomas McKenna proved that one act of courage and kindness can transform not just one life, but many lives. His legacy lived on in the friendship between his ranch and the Lakota people for generations to come. The little girl he pulled from the flooding river grew up to be a wise woman and a leader among her people. She never forgot the white man who treated her like his own daughter when she needed help most. And somewhere in Montana, on a successful ranch in a hidden valley, Thomas's story is still remembered as proof that the best things in life come to those who help others without expecting anything in return.